Necessity is the mother of all invention. That is one half of the story of the subject of this particular piece. For the infamous and dangerous Clan Jade Falcon, the machine that we will be observing here represented a lifeline to a new dawn, one that existed in the aftermath of one of the most disastrous conflicts in their clan's history, where triumph became interwoven with shame and defeat. Almost more important than their desperation, which gave this machine life, was a rare moment of insight, self-reflection, and willingness to sidestep pride and embrace something many clans find taboo, learning from others, and building upon their successes without acts of violence coming first. So, what does this all mean? Well, it means in this video, we are all going to collectively walk down the path of Clan Jade Falcon's history during the 3050s, as they adapted and grew in the aftermath of a catastrophic setback. You're going to see as the face of the clan shifted somewhat from legendary battlemechs like the Summoner over to simpler, nimbler, and more cost-effective solutions to their problems, at least for a while. In the wake of the failure of Operation Revival, many invading clans needed cost-effective solutions to shortages in their tumens, and none were more effective than perhaps the Battlemech in this video, despite protestations to the contrary. A controversial machine to some, and an absolute champion to others, the mech in question is a major evolution in the light mech concept, building upon what Clan Staradder already innovated at the beginning of the 31st century. So, let's stop dancing around the subject. Prepare yourselves to meet the challenger to the adversities facing Clan Jade Falcon, the Cougar. To understand the development of the mech at the core of this overview, it is appropriate at the very least to do a brief run-over of the conflict between the two primary clans from Operation Revival. They were the deadliest of enemies. Truthfully, almost from the start of clan history, both were subordinated though, at least in theory, to the operations set out by the clan council, and that was to achieve the conquest of the Inner Sphere and the restoration of what had been lost prior to the First Succession War. The origins of this feud go all the way back to the earliest moments of the clans. The descendants of Elizabeth Hazen, one of the heroes of the Star League Civil War, the Falcons believed it was a snub against their glorious organization that Nicholas Kerensky's legacy was placed within Clan Wolf, rather than Clan Jade Falcon, as they felt they had earned it under the conditions he set out. This was only made worse due to the ultra-conservative bent the clan had taken at the time, where they followed as rigid of a doctrine towards Kerensky's teachings as possible. The rivalry started and never ended from here on out, with the two clashing at almost every opportunity throughout their time in the Kerensky cluster, whether it be during the Golden Century, Political Century, on the run-up to Operation Revival, or even during the attack on the Inner Sphere itself. The humiliating end to Operation Revival at the hands of Comstar, which was at the very least helped, in the eyes of the Crusaders and even some others, by Ilclan Ulrich Kerensky, was a calamity. Ideologically, it was unacceptable, but their pride was even more badly savaged by having lost to Freebirth warriors, in spite of claiming their own honor was intact due to the bizarre and objectively incorrect ascribed draw they earned on the planet. Clan Jade Falcon managed to retain much of its political power, and they turned that like a deadly spear towards their now long-hated rivals. The Truce of Tukayyid, the aftermath of the disaster, had to be overturned in order to fuel the Crusaders' need to push for their new Star League. And this meant the ousting of Ulrich Kerensky from the role of Ilclan, through the employment of trumped-up charges in the clan council. The Crusaders, in this instance led by Clan Jade Falcon, would manage to rally the strength in the council to force the issue, but were met by a trial of refusal, instead of choosing an honorable duel as it was put by Clan Jade Falcon. This initiated what was known as the Refusal War. This would be a trial on a scale never seen, as Ulrich bid the entirety of Clan Wolf to his defense, which would more or less result in it fighting the entirety of Clan Jade Falcon. This violent conflict was destructive to Clan Jade Falcon in ways they couldn't militarily digest at all. Despite killing both Natasha Kerensky as well as Ulrich Kerensky, and even winning the trial overall, Clan Jade Falcon lost almost 20 full clusters of manpower and materials. The command integrity of Clan Jade Falcon, too, had functionally collapsed across what remained of what now masqueraded as their galaxy formations, from the severity of their losses. Worst of all, in the Great Refusal, Clan Jade Falcon had twisted the trial into a trial of absorption, attempting to seize Wolf assets to finally end their rivalry, but also to compensate for the severe costs of the campaign. Almost overnight, after the success of the absorption, it was reversed, when Clan Wolf was reconstituted under now Khan Vlad Ward, who then killed Khan Chistu and Ilclan Kritchel as the situation devolved. Leaderless and in shambles, Martha Pryde became Khan of Clan Jade Falcon, and needed to not only rebuild her Tumen in terms of its fighting spirit and warriors, but she also needed to rebuild her broken army's shattered mech forces. Part of doing just that lay not in investing in the heaviest and strongest mechs available, but in what was good enough for the front lines. The Refusal War was a disaster for Clan Jade Falcon. Losing so many political leaders, military officers, and talented Mechwarriors left the Tumen gutted in terms of its military readiness. But just as important, it left the Falcons with a debt in machines as well. Very similar problems were faced by Clan Smoke Jaguar on the other side of the occupation zone too, with their own crisis happening after the disasters on Luthien, Walcott, and of course Tukayyid, badly maiming the once mightiest of clans. This meant that two of the main Crusader clans left in the Inner Sphere were now staring at a miserable fate unless something radical changed for them. For the Jaguars, they would begin delving into alternatives to mechs altogether in an attempt to produce new units quickly. Their efforts took the form of protomechs, while the Falcons pursued a more traditional approach in their rebuilding process. Most of the Falcons' enemies were spheroids in nature at this time, in the form of resistance units within their occupation zone, mercenaries, and the Lyran half of the Federated Commonwealth. Of course, they still had to contend with the newly rebuilt Wolves, but that situation was much more stable than it had been prior. Learning from the Star Adders, who had invented the Adder, or Puma as the Inner Sphere called it, specifically for fighting in the Inner Sphere, I might add, they would begin looking at a military production option very similar to this concept to help recover their savaged military. Only, there were needs to have an entirely new machine, rather than just producing the Puma for themselves. Despite how former thinking the Adder was, combat in the Inner Sphere had revealed several of its major flaws and weaknesses, at least as perceived by the Falcons. Another issue was that the Falcons simply did not have a line to build Adders at the moment. Whether it be them wanting to put their own stamp on a future design more in line with what the Tumen of Clan Jade Falcon wanted to fight their Inner Sphere counterparts, or wanting to avoid the potential humiliation of failing to acquire the rights to build it themselves through traditional clan trials, either by fighting Clan Wolf or Clan Star Adder, they would opt to design a new mech instead. In doing so, Clan Jade Falcon did look at the Adder and decided to use it as the basis of this new project. This would be found to save almost 50% of the overall development time of the Battlemech, and allowed for the Greenbirds to put their own ideas in motion for the mech overall. Taking some inspiration from the Inner Sphere, once the mech was completed, they gave it the title of Cougar, indicating its relation to Clan Staradder's Puma, as well as letting it have their own twist to it. As a light mech, and one weighing in at 35 tons, the Cougar didn't need to invest heavily in its engine size, or many other elements of the chassis, to still have a functional, hard-hitting mech at the end of the design process. For a platform of its size, almost 2/3 of its entire weight are dedicated towards pod space, letting it engage targets much heavier than itself with savagery on most battlefields. This was ideal for what Clan Jade Falcon needed as an Omnimech when it was conceived. It was light, relatively easy to produce for a frontline Omnimech, and still more heavily gunned than most of its Inner Sphere opposition all the way into the heavy mech tier. In other words, it was cheap enough to not be severely missed should one be knocked out, but still heavily gunned enough to bring down mechs much more intimidating than itself. This virtue earned it the title of pocket-heavy when describing its battlefield rule. In the post-revival world even, these features would make it very desirable to other clans, who were often in similar situations to the Jade Falcons themselves. The aforementioned clan Smoke Jaguar wouldn't just dive headfirst into producing protomechs without also trying to rebuild and reinvent their mech forces, and would acquire a substantial number, for the young age of the design that is, of Cougar Battlemechs from their Crusader Jade Falcon allies. These machines would do little to help the Jaguars turn the tide against the all-out assault by the Inner Sphere. However, their own battlefield performances were not unreasonable during Operations Bulldog and Serpent. The mech would have a much more successful track record overall in the hands of the Falcons in the battle for Coventry, though some of this can be due to Inner Sphere pilots in this engagement mistaking the Cougar for the Puma. The Cougar would prove to be, in the long term however, for Clan Jade Falcon, somewhat of a disappointment. The style of warfare this 35-ton heavy mech was conceived to engage in often fell flat. Just to be blunt, the mech didn't fully live up to its intended role. It more or less replaced the Kit Fox as a light fire support battlemech, certainly, but that role was something that clan warriors did not feel the urge to fulfill anyway. It lacked honor. Certainly, it'd been vital in Clan Jade Falcon's recovery, but that didn't make it popular. Its place within the Tumen with time began to diminish as other, more effective mechs were built. In the Dark Age, the Falcons began to look towards their new, almost avian-style totem machines to be their prized leaders, and these easily overshadowed the now aging Cougar even more so. But, as it began to fade from prominence, the Cougar found a new lease on life in a very simple way. Mind you, the method of its survival was something that its clan overlords from before the time of the invasion would have balked at, or sneered with disgust in response to. In the 32nd century, the Cougar's primary function within the Tumen appears to have become trading stock. While Clan Seafox and to a lesser extent Clan Snowraven are viewed rightly as the mercantile clans that have begun spreading their tendrils into the Inner Sphere, Clan Jade Falcon traditionally had a significant and powerful merchant caste. Inside of the Inner Sphere, these merchants would do their work, even while dealing with the warrior leadership of the frustratingly stubborn Khans. In order to enrich the clan, gaining access to raw resources or even favor, it was discovered that Inner Sphere mercenary commands, or even great houses, would pay significantly for clan technology, especially Omnitech. The Jade Falcons had abandoned the pocket-heavy concept in favor of just building more clan-heavy mechs themselves, as they'd long since survived the trials of the 31st century, when the merchant caste began to distribute these mechs like candy across their local region. Not only was the Cougar design considered to not be particularly threatening to Clan Jade Falcon interests due to the change in its priorities, but it ensured that the procurement of these machines from the outside offered a steady income to the Falcons. Even after Malvina took over Clan Jade Falcon, there would still be a market for these mechs' distribution to other commands outside of the Tumen. This did not always end well for its new owners, unfortunately. The false sense of invincibility offered by simply acquiring a dated clan tech design did little to help its new operators. For instance, when it came to the reality of a battle with Clan Jade Falcon itself. The Kell Hounds, who had acquired more than a few Cougars in 3146, came into direct confrontation several times with Clan Jade Falcon, and in a notable engagement on Ark Royal, the seat of power of the Kells themselves, an entire formation of Cougars were torn apart by one of Clan Jade Falcon's replacements for the Cougar, the Iries. When clan merchants come offering to sell their older clan war materials, this usually means the clan itself no longer views those machines as a meaningful threat to their own top-of-the-line hardware. This is not something unfair that the clans do, it's just good business. Never give your would-be enemies the means of destroying you. It only makes sense. Still, despite this, the Cougar remains a popular battlemech for Inner Sphere operators. Whether it be for the Lyran Commonwealth or for the multitude of mercenary units across the region, though its fate over the long term is a bit more questionable. With the collapse of the Jade Falcon occupation zone, and with the implosion and division of Clan Jade Falcon itself across several groups, the Cougar, now only built on Sudeten, the capital of the remnants of the clan, led by Khan G. Chistu, may not have the distribution and support it once did. The Alina Mercantile Guild, led by the Merchant Queen, is comprised of almost the entirety of the merchant caste of Clan Jade Falcon. Their disdain for the ways of the clans is more than obvious, and so their ability to acquire these machines and distribute them from their now hated rival may not be as easy as one might imagine. For the Falcon remnants under Chistu, they have but one arc ship, and only a handful of merchants. While the mech can still be produced, and is still produced, it is also now likely being redirected toward Khan Chistu's desperate forces. And even if it weren't, and was distributed to try to acquire vital materials, there are no means of actually dealing it out. And that's provided that people would even bother to speak with a Jade Falcon merchant at all, after the horrors Malvina unleashed upon the region. All of this also assumes as well that Sudeten and Clan Jade Falcon in Exile survived to distribute the Cougar once more, which is by no means a certainty at this point. In other words, in spite of being arguably the most recognizable clan light mech in the setting, in spite of having achieved broad adoption by the Inner Sphere's mercenaries and Great House forces, and in spite of it being a staple of Clan Jade Falcon, the future of this pocket-heavy-mech, or this Cougar, is far from certain, as the setting continues the march forwards into the Ilclan era. A light mech weighing in at 35 tons, the Cougar is a fascinating, lopsided battle mech with excellent firepower, but at the cost of its mobility and even armored protection. Broadly adopted by the Ilclan era, it has never deviated from its light-heavy mech style over the near century since its first production by Clan Jade Falcon. A well-thought-out machine upon its introduction, the Cougar itself has had mixed battlefield results throughout its production run, and while controversial to some, especially to clan Mechwarriors, it is still one of the most fascinating light clan battlemechs ever devised. To make this light Omnimech devil work, many advanced technologies and sacrifices needed to be made. So let's begin examining the mech's core chassis features. In order to save on weight, and due to the limitations of the critical system inside of battlemechs, the first and easiest decision for the designers was to allow the Cougar's internal structure to be comprised of clan-quality endo steel, with its JF3 light endo steel frame weighing in at only 2 tons. This is one of the most common upgrades for any clan mech, and may be the best weight-saving measure in the setting. Next, it has a standard gyro and cockpit, which are simple and reliable, At the time of the Cougar's development as well, there were very limited options for alternatives to these anyway. For cooling, it has 10 stock inbuilt double heat sinks, giving it the ability to dump 20 heat every turn. And due to the very small size of the Cougar's engine, unfortunately this also ensures that several of its heat sinks come pre-installed into its critical spaces, as they can't fit into its engine. All of these characteristics, as well as more yet to be shown, conclude in the Cougar having a stunning 19 tons of available pod space on board, making it indeed as armed as some heavy mechs. This is a major accomplishment by the Jade Falcon technicians who designed it, though it is important to note there is a price to be paid for this incredibly powerful attribute being available in a mech of this size. For its electronic systems, it has the straightforward JF integrated communications package, as well as the Series JF8 KITT targeting and tracking system. Neither of these give the Cougar any additional benefits. In fact, the only design quirk that this Battlemech has reflects the rate which the Jade Falcons produce them at, as well as their willingness to broadly distribute them, which is the ubiquitous trait. This impacts campaigns, and not one-off battles, but it is still a useful trait to have. Perhaps one of the great Achilles heels for this Jade Falcon machine, and one which saw it, and mechs similar to it, namely the Adder and Kitfox, rescind from favor amongst the clan Tumen, mobility is without a doubt an issue for this hard-hitting light. While it still does see use in the Falcons, in both of their forms in later years even, this one quality is its greatest hindrance, and it is the price it pays for such a heavy loadout of weaponry. How much of a burden is it? Well, the Cougar, as far as light clan Omnimechs are concerned, may just be the slowest and least agile of any mech in its weight bracket. Powered by a 3.5-ton Clantech 175 JF extra light fusion engine, the Cougar can only reach a maximum speed of 86 km per hour, or 8 movement points in the tabletop game. To put this in context, this would be considered slow for an inner sphere light mech even during the Succession Wars, while it is fast enough to keep up with most clan heavy mech forces, further reinforcing its role as a light fire support asset, and pocket-heavy-mech ideals. It does not do the mech any favors when ironically facing off against other clan light mechs, and especially mediums. In fact, if an inner sphere light mech catches one of these Cougars off guard, there is a strong chance it will be undone, even by its technologically inferior inner sphere counterparts. Some later configurations do install pod-based jump jets on board, but by and large the Cougar is a ground-locked, slow-paced light mech. To be successful on the battlefield, and the Cougar most definitely can lean into its strengths and be successful, it needs to mitigate its low mobility and movement at every turn by striking first and attacking on its terms, rather than those of its enemies. Sometimes, sadly, this is easier said than done, but the Cougar's options will quickly become limited in regards to its battlefield placement and defensive bonuses, if it is checked quickly and harshly. When one lacks agility in Battletech, they'd often better look towards physical defense to be their savior, and in the case of the Cougar's core chassis, it's hard to argue that it is sufficiently protected, at least for its cost and the era of its manufacture. While it invests in advanced clan materials to comprise its armor, namely using compound JF ferrofibrous plating, it doesn't have the volume of the plating it needs in order to keep the mech truly safe. That is because it has 5.5 tons of armor on board overall, giving it 106 points of protection in total. During the Succession Wars, this would actually be fairly significant, matching mechs like the relatively heavily guarded Panther. But in the realm of the late clan invasion and forwards, on a relatively slow machine like the Cougar, this is just not adequate to keep this particular frame alive. With its center torso having 14 points of exterior armor, and its side torsos being 12, along with its legs, it just means it will be badly mauled by any form of heavy weaponry hitting any part of its body, given its slow speed and heavy firepower, the Cougar will be a priority for enemy guns to take out early in a fight, and its armor just won't prevent that reality from taking place. This is another hurdle for its pilots to overcome, and is likely one of the reasons why it lacks favorability from the Falcons after their recovery. But, for all this sacrifice, there has to be a boon somewhere, so let's see what its configurations have on offer. Do they offset these limitations? Leaning into some of the clan's best weaponry available, you'd be surprised to find out that the Cougar Prime is an absolute terror in terms of its firepower on the battlefields of the 31st and even the 32nd centuries. While it will run hot if overly stressed, the attacking power it puts on display is more than impressive. It is also the Cougar that perhaps deals best with mechs in its own weight class too, due to the high precision of its offensive tools. So what does it bring to the table, you may ask? Things start with a pair of devastating arm-mounted clan large pulse lasers. These have an incredibly effective range of 20 hexes, and have an amazing 2 bonus to hit at any bracket they're firing in. These can also pick apart lighter adversaries before they become a true threat to the Cougar itself, and will let it land significant, armor-stripping blows on enemy medium and heavy assets too. They are, in a word, perfect in regards to their placement on the Cougar. They also won't badly overheat the mech, and will only require heat cycling when used together every 3rd turn if the mech is running at full speed, provided it doesn't fire its backup weapons at the same time. Speaking of which, it has a pair of clan LRM-10 launchers, found in the side torsos, having 12 rounds per launcher as well. They do great damage, and are more effective than their inner sphere counterparts, due to their ability to function at any range bracket. Where things fall short for the Cougar is in its ability to actually keep the mech cool in this configuration. An alpha strike would be catastrophic for the mech, and should it do it, it'd only be under the direst of conditions. Its LRMs seem to be largely there for indirect fire, and when cycling its large pulse lasers, or as backup weapons should its primary lasers be knocked out. They also prove valuable in potentially crit-seeking an already badly depleted opponent. With the Cougar's speed already being slow, overheating by 10 to 12 points in an alpha strike would basically reduce the mech's maneuverability to that of an assault mech, and that would almost immediately put it in jeopardy of being annihilated the next turn by any available enemy weaponry. The Prime is a powerful tool when used wisely, and its pulse lasers do offset some of the core weaknesses of the mech. But mismanaging this machine will be completely unforgiving, and this must be kept in mind. Treat it with respect, and it should deliver some meaningful results for you. Mirroring its parent, the Adder, the Cougar A's configuration is a devastating LRM platform. As heavily armed as a 70-ton Archer, the Cougar A is a very straightforward machine. It has a pair of arm-mounted ER medium lasers as a backup, and a small pulse laser in its head. After this, it has a duo of Clantech LRM-20 launchers, with Artemis 4 fire control systems on board, and each launcher has 12 rounds of fire. This mech is a genuine, devastating nightmare to face off against. While being operated by honorable clan pilots, it may ironically have some issues, however. Clan pilots, with their honor dueling system, will likely not be able to exploit its indirect fire capabilities very often, and will force the mech into conflicts it may not benefit from. Even then, its barrages of LRM missiles will still be truly devastating, and the mech will run relatively cool, not even critically overheating when firing all 4 of his main systems. But it is in the hands of inner sphere mercenaries that this Cougar becomes irresistible. When seeking its prey, it can stalk safely from behind cover or obscuring terrain, while other friendly recon assets spot targets, and it unleashes the full fury of an ARC Battlemech on its enemies every turn. If its opponents are still in the open against it, its Artemis systems will boost these missiles enough to see them put real work in. Much like the Prime, the A brings something very powerful and unique to the battlefield. For inner sphere operators too, it is the perfect light support mech, given its value in regards to consistent indirect fire, and being able to keep up with heavy formations with ease. It is, however, an easier target for fast strikers to pick off, so it must be managed carefully to get the most out of it in any engagement. Direct fire never looked so good on a light mech. A blatant upgrade over the original Adder Prime, the Cougar B is a PPC firing menace with few equals. It is a particle-slinging nightmare, and while it may not be as fast or protected, its firepower is just so deadly that it might survive just by flattening whatever it is up against first. It is a light sniping monster extraordinaire. Its loadout is very simple. It adds 6 additional double heatsinks to keep the mech cold even while running and firing, unlike the Adder Prime. Then it has a head-mounted ER medium laser as a backup. Outside of this, it is just a pair of Clantech extended-range arm-mounted particle projection cannons. Each hit lands with the force of a Gauss rifle. They headcap, and they blast holes in targets. They will also make the Cougar B a definite target for removal by an enemy unit upon getting the opportunity to bring it down. This extreme firepower actually has to be used wisely, only exposing the mech as necessary to make decisive contributions to a battle. It is a threat to heavies, mediums, and even assault mechs, and so it will be a priority target for the enemy's heaviest guns. Don't give them the chance. Divide up the enemy, and the Cougar B will isolate and conquer them. Easily one of the most dangerous and balanced Cougars there is, this predator stalks any game, at any range, and will do enormous damage to anyone who tries to engage it. Why do I say this? Because the Cougar C brings 2 deadly sets of arms into the battle that will destroy their foes at either short or long ranges. For up-close fighting, it has 5 Clantech ER medium lasers, with 1 in the head and 4 in the right arm. These lasers hit with almost the same power as an inner sphere large laser, and the same range. It lets the mech reach out to medium ranges and do real damage, and unless it fires all of its lasers, it won't overheat severely enough to reduce its movement. But the real killer on this configuration is its long-range, nickel-iron slug-slinging, left-arm mounted Gauss rifle. With 16 rounds of ammunition, this weapon is a nightmare to deal with, and can head clip just like the B's ER PPCs. What makes it even better, though, is that it also only generates 1 heat. This means, without suffering immediate penalties, the C can run, fire 4 of its medium lasers and its Gauss rifle, and cycle a single medium laser the next turn, doing the same thing basically. Once again, this Cougar will be a target for enemy fire for what it brings to the table, but it does bring a dangerous offering to said table. When the C chooses a target and takes its time, it'll bag whatever it's looking for, barring the hardiest and most resilient of mechs. The C really does show just how much of a pocket heavy the Cougar really is. Conceived during the Blakest era, the F configuration was an attempt by Clan Jade Falcon to address some of the mobility issues the mech faced, while setting it up for close-range killing of infantry, battle armor, and general upfront fighting. It is a vicious city and forest fighter, and will brawl targets into the ground if given the chance. To start with, it does indeed have 5 jump jets installed, adding a layer of movement the mech traditionally almost never has. This means it can generate meaningful defensive bonuses through leaping. It can also get out of a bad situation, and it can reposition to cover as needed. Nothing is more vital for a light mech in these conditions, especially one with limitations like the Cougar. To start to show the Cougar's teeth, let's begin with the weapons it uses against its most vulnerable prey. It has 8 heavy machine guns configured into 2 machine gun arrays. These may have very, very limited range, but vehicles, mechs, or infantry that fall into their path will be absolutely shredded, but especially infantry. To add yet more kick to this mech's anti-infantry weaponry, or in this case its anti-battle armor capabilities, it has a pair of B-pods on board as well, found in its side torsos, for dissuading said battle armor from attempting to engage the mech in its main hunting grounds, or indeed, to hunt them itself. After this, we get into its laser systems, which start with a pair of arm-mounted Clantech medium pulse lasers. These strike hard, and are extremely accurate, just like the Clan large pulse lasers they are related to, though obviously with shorter ranges and less damage. In a city or forest, however, these will do the job just fine. Finally, it has a Streak SRM-4 for adding the last layer of punching power to the mech's needs. The F is more agile, it's heavily gunned in its intended roles, and it is bagging whatever prey it is looking for when fighting in the mean streets of urban warfare. You don't want one of these to spy you at the club. By the late Dark Age and Ilclan era, the Cougar was indeed more than looking like it was long in the tooth in many respects. The pocket-heavy concept seemed to have run its course, with inner sphere enemies beginning to look more and more like their clan counterparts. But the engineers at Clan Jade Falcon, and undoubtedly their merchants as well, wanted to prove that the Cougar was aging more gracefully than it first appeared. It could still go on the hunt, and it could still find willing pilots across the inner sphere, and maybe even inside of the clans too. This of course meant that it needed a very major modernization variant, and there appeared to be an intention to do just that. Thus, the Cougar T was conceived in 3142. First, to try to address some of its survivability issues, a Watchdog CEWS is installed on board, giving the Cougar some level of additional protection electronically, but also helping its sensor arrays as well. Next, it adds a supercharger on board in order to enhance the mech's notoriously poor movement profile, even if it comes at a risk, and wisely should only be used sparingly. These are helpful additions to the mech, and give it more options when entering a battlefield. Finally, before getting to its weapons, it has a targeting computer, enhancing its accuracy. Given the nature of its main systems that benefit from this feature, the Cougar T's abilities are greatly enhanced by it. Already supremely accurate, and on this mech even more so as its primary arm-mounted systems, this Cougar supports twin ER medium pulse lasers. These reach out to 14 hexes and do a reasonable 7 points of damage each. They generate 6 points of heat too, but the Cougar can run and gun with these without a problem. With the benefit of 3 more accuracy to hit every turn, that means the Cougar more or less engages targets at long range with almost no negative modifier due to that range. And its medium range bracket is better than most mechs close range while engaging them. As the final piece to this puzzle, it has a pair of Streak LRM-10 launchers with 12 rounds of ammunition each. There is no direct fire on these, sadly, but it always hits with a major payload of missiles, and they don't generate heat when they miss, making them the perfect companions to the T while firing at its own long-range brackets, as ideally you'd want to miss with one anyway to prevent a thermal overflow. They scatter over targets still, but do more than enough damage. Overall, the T is an excellent upgrade package, and really keeps the Cougar in the game, as it were. While there are Cougars that may do more damage, or be more specialized, none are as balanced as this new cutting-edge variant. It is what it needs to be, being the right configuration, at the right time. It always finds someone to come home with, even for all of its blemishes. The Cougar is a visibly gorgeous battlemech. Truly, it is. Of all of the light mechs ever designed for the game, its silhouette is perhaps the most striking, and this was exemplified by it being chosen to be the face of Mechassault 1. These kinds of decisions are often based on looks alone, and not substance, but that doesn't make the mech chosen for these spots any less iconic. When it comes to its performance, typically one looks at the Cougar in one of two ways. It is either seen as a failure of the armored triangle, missing 2 of the 3 vital regions of it, or it can be seen as a devastating fire-throwing monster. The truth of these things, though, is often somewhere in between. but I have my own observations of this mech that goes beyond something so simple, if I can be so bold. The Cougar is more than simply a pocket-heavy-mech taken to its natural conclusions. It is a light mech assault gun, and when viewed in this light, it may be one of the most brilliant machines ever built, mirroring, conceptually, many of the strengths of traditional armored vehicles in real life. It sacrifices some mobility and battlefield awareness, as well as some of its armored protection, to still be an adequate moving, heavily gunned platform that will shatter mechs far larger than itself. In fact, it is almost as heavily armed as the 80-ton Gargoyle, just in terms of its open pod space. The real limitations this mech has is not its build or profile, it's the methods of clan engagements and warfare that saw this mech fall out of favor. Clan tactics were the letdown, not the machine. Even with the gradual abandonment of Zelbringen, at least when fighting inner sphere adversaries, clan concepts of fighting are frankly too selfish to allow for it to be as successful as it should have been. When brought into the inner sphere's militaries, thus explaining so much of its popularity with mercenaries, it can bring to the battlefield a small, highly dangerous, and highly explosive amount of attacking potential that can keep up with most inner sphere formations. Cooperation and teamwork is this mech's true power. In engagements not bound by honor, it is not a sluggish underperformer, but a brutal backline support machine that will tear into its enemies with multiple deadly configurations that all deliver catastrophic and traumatic amounts of degrading fire into its enemies, even when configured for fighting in close. Like with the F configuration, it will tear into its intended targets when employed as it was intended. It is still not without its weaknesses, being vulnerable to heavy fire or enemy light mechs, but its virtues vastly outweigh its shortcomings. Just even to dismiss the examples that were given as to why Clan Jade Falcon has slowly been repulsed by the design, the example of the fight on Ark Royal proves nothing. The Kell Hounds frankly employed their Cougars absurdly poorly in the operation. Instead of pairing these mechs with mediums, heavies, or assaults, and preparing them for a supporting role, which they could do magnificently, they deployed them together in vulnerable terrain conditions and allowed them to be put into conflict with fast-moving, agile light mechs. Of course they would be defeated under these conditions. This is not the failure of the Cougar. This is a failure of the Kell Hounds to understand their own Battlemech strengths and sending them into a hopeless situation. This mech is not popular because it is cheap clan tech being purchased from Clan Jade Falcon. This feline-named machine is popular because its value can be found by inner sphere Mechwarriors who use it in tandem with their other units to sharpen their formations, enhancing a deadly edge, while their other machines compensate for the Cougar's potential problems. They will complement one another. A light lance with a Cougar will see faster elements of the lance attempt to shield their comrade from the enemy, dissuading flanking strikes while the Cougar's firepower withers and smashes their opposition. A heavy formation will see the Cougar keep pace with them and hide behind its more durable allies, while delivering once more deadly salvos on its enemies, especially in its LRM configuration. While this mech may have been born of Clan Jade Falcon's great moment of desperation, its real value has been found by those who can best exploit its greatest potential. As long as it's protected from its faults, the Cougar will unleash hell upon its rivals without mercy. To underestimate it is the height of folly. Understanding it and its strengths is both the best way to defeat it and the best way to defeat others with it. No mech exists in a vacuum. All of them have a role somewhere. Seek this mech out and use it with cunning, and it will help you on your steps to victory. Even if those who forged it on Sudaden don't understand that for themselves in their arrogance and hubris. To quote the unfortunate depiction of Adam Steiner from the 1990s depiction of Battletech, information is ammunition, and the Cougar is most definitely a dangerous caliber of ammunition. Look on the bright side, kid. You get to keep all the money. Thank you all for joining me here today. Here it is, as voted by the channel's members in November. This was the one mech they wanted to see get done long before its technical readout would be reached. While my coverage of 3055 may have slowed in December, and there is seemingly minimal interest in it, the road is going to be continued along this path. The Watchman, Tempest, and Gunslinger are planned already, and will be seeing the light of day early next year. I have more exciting reveals, or at least I think they're exciting reveals, coming about the Warhammer 2C video over the next few weeks on the community page. Keep an eye out for that, because it is going to be an enormous video. It is currently looking like it's going to be over 3 hours. Just in case this is the last video for this year, which I'm not sure of because I would like to be able to do a year in review video too. Looking back at 2023, I just want to thank all of you for your incredible support. Whether you are subscribers or channel members, I do my best with these videos to bring you all some entertainment, and a bit of lore and mechanical use with every video. But with that, remember, if you enjoyed this, don't forget to smash that like button. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe. And let's end this with me asking you all a question. What did you think of the Cougar? Let me know in the comments section below, and I'll catch you all there. And if I don't catch you on video before the holidays get going, have yourselves a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays. And if I don't catch you before the end of the year, have a Happy New Year's.